from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist, Tony Stewart.
Welcome back to the second program with the National Education Association and the Idaho Education Association dealing with civil and human rights. We had on our program last week Sue Hanson-Barber, and she's back with us today, and we're so pleased to have her back. She is a teacher in the Wallace School District, and she's also the coordinator of special development programs, but she's here this week as she was last week in her capacity as chair of the Human and Civil Rights Committee of the Idaho Education Association. Last week we discussed in a very general way the work of both the NEA and the IEA in the field of civil and human rights and curriculum and in public policy and a variety of works that they do. This week we want to talk with Sue Hanson-Barber about the workshops and how that becomes a very important part of what counselors and teachers learn and do in relation to the field of human and civil rights. Sue, it's a pleasure having you back. We enjoyed last week very much and look forward to this program.
Thank you.
And I'm very happy to have back our two panelists from last week. First of all is Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Lloyd Marsh, who is a faculty member at North Idaho College in the field of physical sciences. And I shall ask Janelle to commence the questioning.
So we're going to be talking about workshops today, and so can you tell us who comes to these workshops and what are the themes of the workshops?
Okay. The workshops that the IEA has offered through Human and Civil Rights are we have a minority leadership training, we have a women's leadership training, and the ones that we've added this year are two workshops, one that deals with sexual harassment issues that actually came as part of an NEA package that one of our members found out about when she went to the Representative Assembly. And we had another project that we did last year in prejudice reduction, which was called Facing History and Ourselves. And the last one that we'll be talking about a little later is the workshop that we have on homophobia. And the workshops that we are dealing with are attended by teachers, and they are advertised through the Idaho Education Association throughout the state, and we try to bring in teachers to the place in the state where that's happening, and sometimes we're even looking at targeting people so that we can train them to be trainers, so that we can in Idaho can have our own cadres of trainers to do workshops around the state.
And then in that way the teacher would go out into the classroom and hopefully bring those messages to the students. Is that
right.
correct?
In some of the workshops, in the Facing History and Ourselves, that was a workshop that was done so that teachers could go into the classroom with a curriculum that was on prejudice reduction. DeVoris Lavin brought that. We co-sponsored that with the Northwest Coalition and had that workshop before that conference last year. And that one ended with curriculum materials that could go straight into the classroom. The minority leadership training and the women's leadership training are NEA trainings that have been brought to Idaho. And really they are training the teachers to become leaders in their field and leaders in their organization in the Idaho Education Association. And so the minority leadership training and women's leadership training, we're trying to get cadres of people to do that so that they can train other teachers to become leaders in the professional organization and in their classrooms.
Let's start with one of those programs and kind of give us a little walkthrough of what the purposes are of that particular program, what you're trying to accomplish, and in sort of a touching way, how it might personally affect our viewers.
Okay. In the women's leadership training, which is one that I took a couple summers ago, it begins with just an idea of in women's leadership, it's the empowering of the person. So we begin by looking at how people communicate and how women can be involved in communication at different levels. in their jobs, in their workplace, in their professional organization, in their classroom, and then begin to work on the empowerment and leadership skills, and working toward being a leader in the organization. And much of that does focus on the organization of teachers, because from the grassroots movement are the people who are the leaders within the organization, and as we train people, they can take positions of leadership and influence other people in their job and in their organization.
Lloyd Marsh.
Would you run several workshops on a particular subject in the state of Idaho, or one workshop a year, or how does that work?
What we've been doing, the Idaho Education Association HCR committee, the Human and Civil Rights Committee, is not the only committee that does workshops and training workshops. The IEA is very involved in doing workshops in many different arenas. We have taken on the arena of the human and civil rights, and so we've been trying to do at least one a year, and this year we're going to end up with three workshops, because the planning to get people into one spot is pretty intense. So we try to coordinate, into specific workshops. But the other IEA committees, the Instruction and Professional Development Committee, for instance, has workshops that go on around the state, that are classes that can be for credit that will happen in different places throughout the state during the year. They also co-sponsor a large convention during the state workshop days called the Instruction and Professional Development Conference, which brings in many speakers and many workshops into a 2-day session. So teachers, what we're trying to do is provide things for teachers that they're looking for. And we spoke about that in the last program of addressing the needs of teachers. And one of the things we're finding is teachers do want information, and they do like attending the workshops, and they do find those valuable as bringing them more information about their work in the classroom and their involvement in the organization.
Right. And would you see this following on to establish a network of sorts in the state of Idaho where these people would have some means of communications?
That's interesting, because that used to be the system in Idaho, in the Idaho Education Association. It was called a mobile lab, and it was one where there were a number of workshops and classes contained where people were trained around the state to do a workshop, and a school district or an area could call and say, we really would like a workshop in this area, and they would bring that in. And what happened was, because of lack of funds and to be able to get people mobilized to go around the state, that has kind of dropped off. What we're doing now is to revive portions of that by saying, what do you want, teachers? And then if there are a number of teachers who would like something, trying to bring that information to them in their setting.
And so ultimately we would affect the curriculum somehow through these workshops. We would get the input to do that.
I'm sure that we would, especially in workshops like the one that we sponsored last year with Facing History and Ourselves. I mean, those people went away with a curriculum that can be implemented into their social studies classes. That's where it ultimately focused there. But I'm sure that in those classes the curriculum was affected and changed.
Both just what you said now and what we said last week is that when you deal with all your many, many projects that you have in this particular committee and the workshops, as you indicated, a lot of that is evolving into curriculum in the future that deals with what we identified last week as multicultural programs and pluralism and diversity and bias reduction. But Sue, I want to move into another area of the purpose of the workshops, particularly one of the ones that you and some other people, I believe Grace Owens and Pocatello and others involved in, and it has to do with your workshop on homophobia. And I've looked at your material and your goals and your objectives, and so something we haven't talked about at all today, and that has to do with how can teachers, and I would assume counselors also, become involved in these kind of workshops to go back to school, and in this particular component, not with the curriculum, but working with individuals who are facing the biases and the prejudices. Would you enlighten us and take us through how that workshop works, and then I have some more specific questions on what happens to students that are facing the prejudice and bigotry.
Okay. The workshop that you're referring to was one that we found out about through the NEA. And actually that came out of a long process the NEA has gone through of addressing the needs of homosexual students and homosexual people as far as classroom teachers and beyond. And in their process, what they committed to was a training of any state that wanted to receive training in that workshop for the next 3 years. And Grace and Idaho picked that up and decided that yes, that was important, and decided to send Grace and myself to the training in Washington D.C. so that we could become a trainer and provide that workshop. And from that workshop, we came back to Idaho with the commitment to do 2 trainings a year. And we provided the first one through a summer leadership workshop that the IEA has every summer at a different college campus. This year it was at ISU. So it was advertised through all the IEA literature and given out as an option for a one-day class where people would come in early. And that was volunteer, and out of our first workshop, we had 10 participants, which we felt was very, very good. It was a very good indication that we could find some success in bringing this to teachers.
In relation, I guess there's 2 parts or 2 steps, and maybe more. I'm not familiar with all your work in this workshop, but one of the first steps is to identify for the teachers the magnitude of the issue itself and the problem. I guess what I'm saying, did you find that in workshop that the teachers themselves are unaware of all the aspects of what happens to the individuals?
That is true. I think that's part of what we looked at. Another aspect that we looked at in beginning was just being able to bring up the discussion. I think one of the great fears we had in bringing the workshop to Idaho at first was just the idea that these were things that were never discussed. And so we spent quite a bit of time in the workshop dealing with our own beliefs and our own value systems and things that we bring, our own experiences that we bring to so that we can create a new awareness, a different awareness of that yes, this is reality. Homosexuality is a reality in society at large, and these are some of the issues that students face who are homosexual, and how can we deal with that?
Then the second component I would think would be that when the teachers went back and they have been trained to deal with those questions, what are some of the things that you have in the workshop or advice you have to teachers as they deal with young people who face problem? And I want to preface that by saying that the Northwest Coalition Against Malicious Harassment has some statistics they received nationally that young people who are gay or lesbian have a much higher suicide rate than other teenagers. And so is that part of your work, to try to go through a preventive process to get individuals who are feeling more desperate and are taking those steps towards such things as suicide?
One of the things that we did do, yes, that's true. We do try to deal with that. One of the things that we did was to go to the people who are affected and begin the discussion there. So one of, I think, the most valuable parts of the workshop is that we have a panel of gay and lesbian students. They were students that came in, plus parents of gay, part of PFLAG, parents and friends of lesbians and gays who came to the workshop as a panel. And in that discussion, what we found was students in high school said the most important thing that we could know is that there was a supportive place for us to talk. And that most of them expressed the need for it not to be very open, but to be more underground. And it was interesting that at the end of the day, throughout all of our discussions, we talked about incidents that happened in school hallways. How would you deal with them? Incidences of homophobic remarks, how do you deal with them? Incidences of homophobic jokes, how do you deal with them in classes? And we talked about personal plans of attack, so to speak, personal plans of what do you do when you get in that situation. And we always ended up with making the discussion of making a comfortable and safe environment for all students, which I think was our end goal. How do you make an environment where racial and ethnic and homophobic and whatever kinds of harassment is not acceptable, and where you as a teacher are in control of that in a classroom. And that's where we really started discussing. It ended up that our action plans were not system-wide changes necessarily, but changes of within my own life and within my classroom. How can I make changes?
Thank you. Janelle Berg.
That leads us then to the whole issue of prejudice reduction. Do you feel that prejudice reduction also reduces violence?
Yes, I do, because I think it gives a new system to dealing with those issues. We're not asking. I think sometimes when we talk about dealing with racial differences or dealing with any kinds of differences, we talk about people get the idea that you can ignore it or you can turn your head, and that's how you deal with those kinds of things. And I think that's not entirely successful. We know that when an issue happens, or when homophobic remarks are made, when racial remarks are made, that there has to be a way of dealing with those. And I think giving students those tools to deal with that, communication tools, conflict resolution tools, can do nothing but reduce violence in classrooms and in people's lives.
Can you give us some examples of conflict resolution in the school setting?
One of the things that we did in this workshop particularly was to look at different situations, and we tried to think of one-liners as comebacks. And I wish I had the list here of the one-liners we had, but there were instances where a homophobic remark is made or a joke is made by a student, and the teacher reflects back, what do you think that means? Asking for the definition of a term used, like the word faggot. One was the word faggot, and the person said, well, the teacher said back, what is the definition of that term? And of course the student didn't know, and so he defined the term as being that as a bundle of sticks. And to them, and used that as a remark to say, when you use a term like that, here's the meaning that's behind. Here's the feeling that you're giving behind that, but here's the real meaning of that. We need to talk about communication, and then work toward the communication ends of things.
So you're saying that violence is reduced by actually having more understanding,
right,
between the individuals.
Right.
Now, do you find that there is more violence that is prejudice related as students get older in the high school years? Do you find that to be true?
Yes, I think that's true, and I think you could probably see that just in general in the high school population, or, as we move up through age levels, that you'll see more violence and more of that as we get older anyway. But yes, I think in prejudice, in racial situations or homophobic situations, that is true, that we see that more.
The gang-related activities, for example.
Yes.
And some of these things go on outside of school as well as inside school, but perhaps the skills learned at school can be utilized outside the classroom setting.
Some of the things that we've seen from classrooms who are picking up conflict resolution, especially in elementary school, and then carrying it through to the high school, is that teachers are reporting that when a student has those tools and learns how to use those tools, that it's like a new thought pattern. It becomes the new thought pattern, and faced with a situation even outside of school, hopefully that's the new thought pattern that carries through, and the new communication that's carried through when they're in any situation.
Lloyd Marsh.
With a lot of our control in the school districts at a local level, does the IEA expect to provide continuing support if we send faculty, teachers to workshops and they get some idea of what they want to do with their class? Does the IE now follow up with literature or whatever, support type things to, and provide the environment for the teacher to do that?
Yes, they do. And I know that in the Facing History and Ourselves, the Prejudice Reduction, that those materials have been made available. They were given to the teacher to take back, who could then talk to the school district about implementing that within their classroom, and hopefully within the rest of the teachers in that subject area. So the IEA is providing assistance in that and we'll try to do more of that as we go along.
So would it be possible for local school board members to attend the IEA workshops if they were interested?
I never thought about that, but
because
I
it's
think
such
that
a
would be
problem
fine.
when you get back to the local level of control. I mean, in the local area of Coeur d'Alene school districts, I mean, we've had some controversial issues
Yes, you
lately
have.
on sex education. We've had controversial issues on some of the textbooks, and so if we don't educate the populace and the local school boards, I think we're missing something.
Right. I think you're very correct in that, and we talk all the time about coalition building, and I did in the last program, and I fully believe that we need to continue that, and we need to do that within our own educational system of building coalitions between the administration and teachers and school board members. So we do need to work toward that. You're right.
We've identified some groups, but there is something in society called sexism, and young women have faced a lot of comments and remarks that affect their growth. So we have a lot of things. We have, the gender problem, we have racism, and we have religious prejudices, and on as we go, and you have identified some of those here today. But whatever the prejudice or bigotry might be, it is directed at that individual because of the identification that individual has with the religious group or the race or whatever it is. And when that happens on a continual basis, and sometimes at that age in high school, things can be, if one's not very careful, very cruel as one that becomes socially ostracized or comments made. Sue, in your workshop and you're working with counselors and teachers, what do you have to say, and you can say to our viewers, that does to the individual's self-esteem and self-worth? Do we lose a lot of people in society by that? We've already talked about suicides, losing some people permanently,
Right.
but do we lose their worth in many other ways, about how they feel and then also the contribution they can make to society? That's a very involved question, but I know that's something you address in your work.
In the workshop, particularly the workshop on homophobia, one of the things that we do talk about extensively is the kinds of things that happen to students who are faced with prejudice every single day, and especially in the area of homophobia, because in homosexual prejudices, is because many times those children are not only ostracized from friends, peer groups, from the school where they go to, but from their families, from their relatives, from many other people that are close to them and could be a support group. And children that are found without a support group are found to have much lower self-esteem. They may be very underachievers and not achieving at their grade level or age level, or extremely high overachievers who do everything and try to show that their life is fine and everything's wonderful. Another thing that they found is that children have split lives. In one setting, they are a certain way because that's what's accepted in that setting. In another setting, they're another way. And I can see that could very much happen to any racial minority. In a certain group, they behave in a certain way. At home, they may behave in another way because they find what's acceptable in different settings. And so because of that, they aren't a whole person, aren't able to function as they should be, whole and complete and with good self-esteem, and be able to contribute in the way that they should to society.
And they can confuse them through their whole life when they're living almost different lives in different settings.
Right, and it is one of the things that we talked about in the workshop on homophobia is an identity crisis, which everyone goes through those. I mean, most teenagers are going through some sort of identity crisis, feeling out who they are and where they fit in. But for a child who is suffering from prejudice of one sort or another, that makes it even more complicated and harder to become fully integrated as a human being.
Janelle Burke.
Well, we've talked just a little bit about the victim, but now let's talk about the person who's on the other side who may be delivering this kind of prejudice. What is the danger of being a prisoner of hate? How does this work? And why do we need to do away with making ourselves those prisoners of hate?
Right. One of the things when you just said the person who is perpetrating the prejudice made me think that those persons are victims too. I mean, they, I see them as being just as much in some ways a victim as the other person, because they are a prisoner to that hate, and that is a danger, because that creates that mindset that stays and stays and stays, and we're unable to break that. We talked earlier about a cycle of prejudice and a cycle of violence, kinds of things that happen because you haven't gotten out of that thought pattern. You're unable to break away from that, and there's a great danger in not being able to deal with people that you meet, to deal with people on your jobs, to deal with people in your life. And the reality is that we are a diverse society, and if we can't deal with that, I think we're going to have.
And we're happiest when the people around us are happy.
Right.
And not when we are putting down other people. It would seem to me that for young people to be learning those lessons of friendship and of caring for others would free them to do their best work, to be their most productive people. But you may want to make a comment along those lines as to what students notice. Are they happier when they are able to accept other students for what they are?
Oh, I think so. I think what we've seen through the work we have with students is that many of them, their greatest goal as a high school student is to be accepted and to be cared for by other people around them. And if that's happening among diverse groups, then we're going to be much more of a community, in a sense, in our schools.
Lloyd Marsh, we have less than 2 minutes.
Okay, just a quick one. I know that the spectrum of human and civil rights is pretty broad. Are we making better progress in some areas, in racism, sexism, acceptance of homophobic behavior, or what? Are there any differences?
In areas, I think that in respect to homophobia, I think we're on the edge. We're at the beginning. In Idaho, at least, I know that we're in the beginning. We're creating an awareness. We're saying this is reality, and we need to deal with it. In other areas, we're probably farther along. We've addressed the need for conflict resolution. I think we're beginning to. We've addressed the need for multicultural education, for dealing with students with differences, to talk about ethnic groups. I think we're now getting into the idea of diversity and about the acceptance of all people. And then not just acceptance, but then how do we communicate and how do we deal with people on a day-to-day basis.
I must interrupt. I have the signal that we're out of time, and on behalf of the panel and the staff, Sue, Hanson, Barbara, thank you very much. You've been very generous with your time for 2 weeks, and I know you've shared many thoughts, not only with us, but with our viewers, that is most helpful and most informative, and we would like to invite you back at a later time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed these 2 weeks, and it's a very, very important subject dealing with civil and human rights, and we thank the Idaho Education Association, the National Education Association, for making Sue available for this interview. I'd like to invite you to be with us again next week, and we'll discuss a different subject, and until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Telemedia Services on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.